Who is there to be smelled by whom? Who is there to be heard by whom?
Hello everyone and welcome back. As we mentioned in the last class, sometimes the wild hunt is referred to as being led by a figure referred to as Percht or Perchta. So who exactly is Percht or Perchta? Perchta is a divine figure, sometimes considered a goddess, who originated in the Upper German and Austrian region of the Alps. Perchta is still worshipped as a goddess in modern southern Germanic religions, including that of Erglawa, and amongst some Pennsylvania Dutch families, especially those who practice hexerei. The name Perchta may descend etymologically from the Old High German verb pergen, which means hidden or covered. Most pagan sources cite the name as descending etymologically from the Bright One. However, this only dates back so far as Jacob Grimm making the claim, and does not seem to have any older sources to validate it, at least not that I could find. The name Perchta is sometimes used interchangeably with Berchta. However, depending upon the region, the two may be treated as completely separate and as behaving differently. Perchta may also be referred to as Berta, or in Baden, Swabia, Switzerland, and Slovenia as Frau Faste, the Lady of the Ember Days, or Peta. In Carinthia, amongst the Slovene, she is called, and I know I'm going to mispronounce this, Kvaternika. Kvaternika? I don't know. Other names include Posterli, Kuatemberka, and Fronfastenweiber. In Switzerland, she was called Dame Selten. In German Bohemia and in Bavaria, Perchta was often syncretized with and worshipped as Saint Lucia. In Carinthia, amongst the Slovenes, and in Austria, a male form of Perchta called the Quantenberman in the German language, or the Kvaternik in the Slovene language, meaning the man of the 4 ember days. Grimm, however, cited that Perchta and Berchta's male counterpart or equivalent was referred to as Berchtold, though many historians no longer consider Berchtold valid, as the name appears to be a combination of Berchta and Holda. Some canonical and church records, as detailed previously, treated Perchta as synonymous with female divine figures such as Diana, Herodias, Rochella, Satya, and Abundia. Perchta and or Berchta was associated with the Berchtentag, which takes place on the Feast of the Epiphany, and which may have been merged with the Feast of the Epiphany as an earlier Germanic holiday syncretized into the Christian holiday. Perchta is often associated with other Germanic goddesses such as Hol or Holda and Frigga or Frigg. In some cases, Perchta and Holda are seen as counterparts to one another. Both are associated with being guardians of the beasts, and both appear during the Christmastide, and both are associated with spinning. Grimm stated that Perchta or Berchta was known precisely in those Upper German regions where Holda leaves off, in Swabia, in Alsace, in Switzerland, in Bavaria, and Austria. Some sources treat Berchta and Hol or Holda as the same figure. The combination of Perchta and Hol or Holda, treating them as the same being, began with early Christian writers. By the time Jacob Grimm was writing down and significantly altering fairy tales, the younger aspect of Perchta, more on that in a little bit, had been heavily syncretized with a figure of Germanic lore referred to as the White Lady. By the time Jacob Grimm was writing, it is possible that the blending of Hol or Holda, the White Lady, and Perchta was widespread. However, in reading the myths, their roles and appearances do seem to be highly divergent. Unfortunately, no stories of the White Lady survive in written myth, and so only her beauty and association with winter persist to modern times. Both Hol or Holda and Perchta are said to have charge of the souls of deceased children, especially during particular times of the year. Both are said to fly through the air over the land during Christmastide. Hol or Holda, however, is associated with blessing the fields as she crosses over them in the sky, making them more bountiful for the coming year, although she does blind anyone who looks directly at her. She is generally considered a benevolent figure, though capable of harsh retribution if the situation calls for it, whereas Perchta is often seen as, if not malevolent, then definitely harsher. Perchta is, like Hulda or Hole, said to fly over the skies at midwinter, and at other times, as detailed during the descriptions of the night riding horde, basically during the ember days, so the solstices and the equinoxes. She is often described as entering homes between the 12 days between Christmas and Epiphany, especially on Twelfth Night. Perchta would reward children and young servants in the household who had behaved well and worked hard, and especially those who had completed all of their tasks by the time she visited. She especially rewarded, or targeted, depending upon the perspective, weavers, checking on those who were given flax or wool to spin through the year, and making sure they had spun all the flax or wool that they had been given through the year by the time that she visited. If they had done well, they would often find a silver coin the next day, sometimes in a shoe or in their pail, or they'd be blessed in other ways, with abundance and fertility. If they had not behaved well or had not completed their tasks, she would slit their bellies open, remove their organs, stuff them with straw, and sew them back shut. Perchta is often described as despising waste or greed. Examples of this include, but are not limited to, the killing of hunters who took more than they needed for their families, and setting fire to rooms full of unspun fiber. As Christianity spread and she became deeply associated with Epiphany, she was said to punish those who ate prescribed foods during the period of privation. On her feast day, if people ate greedily or gluttonously or of rich foods instead of eating her traditional meal of fish and gruel, she was said to slit open their bellies and stuff them full of straw. Perchta is often written of as a shapeshifter with multiple forms. Sometimes she is depicted as young and beautiful, and either white as snow or dressed in white garb, though this may be due to her later association with the White Lady. Oftentimes she is depicted as elderly and haggard. Sometimes she has an iron nose and or sharp and long iron fingernails. She is sometimes said to be able to shapeshift into an animal form, most often to that of a bird, but to other animal forms as well. In some accounts, her elderly and haggard form has a single huge foot, sometimes referred to as a goose foot or a swan foot. Grimm recorded that Perchta with a strange foot existed in many languages, and stated it is apparently a swan maiden's foot, which as a mark of her higher nature she cannot lay aside, and at the same time the spinning woman's splay foot that worked the treadle. The cults of Perchta were condemned along the same lines as the hordes of night-riding women. In the Thesaurus Pauperum from 1468 CE, and by the Austrian historian and professor Thomas Ebendorfer von Hasselbach, who lived from 1388 CE to 1464 CE, in his De Decem Praeceptis, which was written in 1439 CE. Perchta is often associated with the wild hunt, sometimes at its head, and with hunting in general. She is often described as being a particularly skilled hunter, and sometimes depicted as carrying a great axe. In some of the stories in which she carries an axe, she throws it at the knee of anyone who spies at her when she rides overhead with the hunt or travels in the forest, and the axe stays implanted in their knee for 1 year until she returns to reclaim it. In some stories, Perchta travels with the aforementioned horde of night-riding women, the ones that we covered in the previous episode. In others, she leads a horde of the dead. Sometimes she is accompanied by 7 dogs. In other stories, she pulls a cart of hunters with her. And in some stories, Perchta is accompanied by a horde of dead children. In many of the versions where Perchta travels with dead children, the children were specifically those who had not been baptized before their deaths. When feasts were laid out for the night-traveling spirits during Christmastide, Perchta would enter with the children and they would eat the feast. In the version of this story found in the Eisack Valley in the Tyrol, in the border between Austria and Italy, the dogs Perchta is sometimes accompanied with represented the souls of dead children. In the Haute Adige in Italy, the troupe Corteo della Berta, the procession of Berta, is said to travel on the Epiphany or on St. Martin's Day. In northern Italy, in the Cadornino or Belluno regions, a divine figure associated with Stragaria, called Rhododessa, who is also associated and syncretized or merged with Perchta, or at least who has a very similar role, is said to fly over the fields at midnight on Epiphany, accompanied by 12 children who represent the souls of all dead unbaptized children in the region. In some versions of the story of Perchta, the unbaptized children are not forever damned to wander and can be saved by those who encounter the horde, naming the children. In one version of the story, particularly popular in the aforementioned Tyrol area, a person came across Perchta and her troop, one of whom was a very small child who kept tripping on his too long garment and struggling to keep up with the rest of the horde. On seeing this and feeling an upswelling of pity, the person is said to have cried out, "Oh, poor ragged urchin." "Oh, poor ragged urchin." This was tantamount to naming the child, and so the unbaptized child was allowed to move on to heaven instead of having to accompany Perchta on her hunts. In approximately 1400 CE, an anonymous English monk of Byland detailed another story in which the horde of dead children of the hunt can be set to heaven if they are named. The story goes that the citizen of Cleveland called Richard Roundtree, whose wife was pregnant, he left his pregnant wife at home and went on a pilgrimage to the tomb of St. James. On the pilgrimage, he and several accompanying companions slept a night in a forest near the Royal Road, with each of them keeping watch for a turn while the other slept. When it was Richard's turn to keep watch, he heard a loud noise from the Royal Road. Going to investigate, he spied upon several figures who rode a strange procession of animals, horses, sheep, oxen, and others, which had been used by their families to pay their funeral expenses when they died. One child in particular stood out to him, a bay in swaddling clothes. He approached the horde and asked the child who it was and what it was seeking. The child replied, "It is not appropriate for you to address me, for you were my father, and I was your stillborn child, buried without being named and baptized." Richard, realizing that his pregnant wife had had a miscarriage while he was on his pilgrimage, took of his own shirt and put it onto the baby, naming it. He took from the baby the swaddling cloth so that he could show his wife that he had set the child free. Having been given a name, the child went off to heaven instead of being damned to accompany the hunt. Alright, so next time we will pick up with the hunt as the elves, the fairies, and the dead. Thank you for joining us. I appreciate that you tuned in, and please remember to like and subscribe and leave us a comment below. Babies. Hey, calm down. Calm down. I'm already snuggling and petting you. I'm already snuggling and petting you.